Okay. We have started.
Okay. Well, the most striking story for me is actually the first story. So you've got many points of debate, many moot points on that. First thing I want to talk about is the idea of actually writing about sex, writing about sexual acts in literature is as I mentioned in the point, when you read it in literature, it doesn't work. It sounds clunky. It sounds out of place. So just wondering if it's a shame that we aren't able to do that, because it's so intrinsic to our lives, so intrinsic also to literature. Any form of expression, whether it's art or writing or film. It appears to work in film, though. There is a way to sort of show it in an abstract fashion, whereas in writing, it only appears to work if it's suggested. Whereas the first story, it's everything is explicit. And I also think it does really work. It does work. Yeah, it does work. And I think it's the driving engine of the story. Is the idea that what the role of sexual intimacy in a relationship, or the absence of it in a relationship, is what I think you're dealing with, and also the idea that attraction could start with sexual fantasy, and then over a period of time it transforms into something much more emotional. So I'm just wondering if people had thoughts on that.
I mean, I saw your comment on the first story, but I mean, after I read it, I didn't really see anything strikingly out of the ordinary in terms of the sexuality there. I mean, what I liked about most of the stories, I've read about 4 or 5 of them, and I think it's the simplicity of a simple message that you're trying to communicate. And the first story is less about, I really didn't see it as about sex as so much as about a woman's breast, exactly as what you're talking about. And it has many dimensions to it. And I think the ending was really poignant in the sense, okay, when something is missing from your body, how striking it is. And that's how I saw it. I mean, so your comment was a surprise to me, because you picked out the sexual aspects of the story more than anything else, while I didn't see it like that at all. I saw it as a human interest story more than anything else. So what was your thinking behind writing this? I mean, were you looking at an explicit message, or?
Yeah, so I can answer it, but does Jacqueline want to say anything about the story before I
did. First, actually, my first comment is to Nash. I kind of wanted to, Nash, you said sex in literature is clunky, and I do want to just work out or find out why we think sex in literature is clunky. But coming back to the story itself, when I initially started reading it, I did feel a little bit uncomfortable, because we are looking at this guy who seems to be layering and a bit, I don't know, just the layering I wasn't comfortable with. But then as the story developed, actually, and the relationship developed, it actually became something more intimate. And then I forgot about the uncomfortableness at the beginning. So yeah, I mean, yeah, but initially it did make me feel uncomfortable. And it did make me think about how, as women, we are objectified, because he's talking about boobs and how he sees her boobs. So it just made me think about how we are objectified as women.
Yes. So I would like to, yes.
Francesca's joined as well. So we're talking about sex, Francesca. So.
Okay, Francesca.
I gather that, yeah. I got that, yeah.
I think we should probably let Francesca then come to you, Rochelle. What did you think of the first story, Francesca?
I liked it. I wasn't, maybe I'm not that flappable. I wasn't phased as much. I thought, yeah, I could see the sort of teenage boy he probably wasn't a teenager, but I could see the fixation, and then getting landed and having to marry the girl, which was a shame, but there we go. But then it turned into a sort of more a more gentle sort of relationship that they had with each other, and in the end, it occurred to them that they didn't really know each other until the very end. There had never been time for a personal question or a sort of a moment of connection until then, because it was all focused on her boobs, and his surprise that she actually liked sex, which was sort of pleasant, but then almost a bit too much for him to handle. So they had to work through things without really understanding what they were working through. I felt they were having a relationship that was deeper than, well, she didn't really get much of a voice, but then at least his way of processing it went. He didn't fully get what was going on between them. And then but I liked the way that it turned into a softer corner. So I liked that. And yeah, I could see that the boobs had, they almost killed her. So they came, there was an arc to that story. So yeah, no, I liked it.
I like the
If it had ended with only talking about him and her boobs and then having to marry her, I would have taken a very different view, because then I would have thought that's a guy I don't like. But we got somewhere better.
Francesca, I agree. I think what makes the story really work is the how it's bookended. You start with this fixation with her boobs, and then she's lost it towards the end, at least one of them, and then he still is fixated with her, but his relationship with this person has transformed. You have to see it with an Indian lens. It does happen with couples where it's almost an obligation, where people do come together and they go through their entire lives as though it is some sort of a duty where they have to fulfill things without actually knowing each other. I can give the example of my parents. They are, my dad's in his 80s, and they seem to really love each other right now. But I didn't see that when I was growing up. I never saw them holding hands. But now they have come to this stage in their life where they are become inseparable. They do really they emote in public right now. So it's that arc that the story portrays, where it starts with some kind of triviality, some kind of a fantasy, and then it develops over time. It's not the case with all relationships. They break, even in an Indian context. Especially if it's based on the triviality, if you want to call it that, of a physical attraction, it's not sustainable for long. There needs to be more to it. Yeah. Okay, Rochelle.
Both Francesca and Jackie are being indoctrinated into the Indian way of thinking every day. So they are a bit moving towards that. Don't worry about that.
No, I'm so glad to hear all your comments. So yeah, I think I've come across this reader feedback, like what Vineet said, that finally the story is not about sex, and it's not about the female anatomy as much as it's about a love story that develops very late, like when two people discover each other too late. But the genesis of the story came about because I also came across the comments of why is it so explicit with buttocks and breast and cock and cunt. Why is it so explicit? So the reasons was that when I was writing this story, and we all write from a certain place of intersection. There are 2 or 3 ideas that intersect at a point when we launch and write a story. So for me, there were 2 or 3 things that came together when I put the first sentence to the story. And that was the street harassment that we face in Bombay, in crowded places, and the anger that you feel when your body is very simply violated in small ways. Just a brush here, just a touch there, and you see it. It's a crowded place. And I think street harassment was one anger that I had within me. Somewhere else, I also felt as to, this entire boy to man talk, breast talk. I've seen the fascination in as small or bigger way as you chat with your, you drink 3 drinks and then you start talking about fantasies, or people would say something, a little this, a little that. This is like, from my growing up days to now, I've seen men who not necessarily had access to women, especially growing up in small town 1990s India. Uh, Premarital sex was not something you could easily get to. So you had a lot of pining, you had a lot of fantasizing, and if you met men or befriended boys of that time, they pine, they fantasize. So I think somewhere that stayed in the corner, in my corner. And then I also saw men who had gone beyond all this. They understood women for the beauty that she had within her, not her body, not her age, not her skin color, nothing mattered. It was the person. So I saw this entire thing. So finally, this kind of amalgamation from these boys and these men finally became Naren. But I think somewhere I also wanted to reclaim the narration of the female anatomy. I wanted to narrate about breasts, because it's a part of my body, it's a part of our body. Why should it just be molested and left? Why should it be, even I thought, to the extent when I was thinking not about this story, but just generally my spectrum of thoughts, the collateral damage of war is women getting their breasts cut. The breast or the anatomy is always part of the collateral damage of war, violence. So I thought, in somewhere I wanted to reclaim that part of the narrative. And so somewhere when all this was happening, some things came together wherein I had an amalgamation of men and boys. I also wanted to give an ode to the breast from Genesis to extinction. And I wanted to talk of something more, which I didn't know because it was not prefigured. As I went along with Naren and Monica, I kind of discovered their patterns of relationship, and it just went about, and I just let it go as I picked the scent and followed it, and it reached where it had to, and I was like glad it reached there, because actually that probably it was all there, but it wasn't coming, and it just it took shape. And it became the story, and I was glad it became this story, because I wasn't intending. I was actually having a lot of black comedy fun talking about their sexual positions, and somebody said, "What is this Catherine wheel?" And from where did you get this? Where the hell did you get all this? I was just saying, I thought, let's give it to Naren. Here's to all those boys and those
Rosa,
men.
did you a quick question for you, did you make that up, or is it some of that actually?
I had to research that deeply. Okay.
Researching
Some of the positions are so dangerous for human beings, and they are in the Kama Sutra. They're very dangerous, and you are like, it can't be possible. You're going to have a fatal accident or a knee injury. So, but I did research, and I had a lot of fun with all those, explicit. I thought, I'm giving it to all of those guys. Take it, and now let's move on. Now we're moving on, right? Now we move on.
I've got a question about the legitimacy of sexual fantasy. It's got a bad reputation. Is it actually that bad as we make it out to be? At least in an Indian context, as you said, Rosha, because teenage boys with their raging testosterone, they don't have access to sex, and with that comes all kinds of problems.
Yes.
And Bollywood doesn't help, because Bollywood it titillates, and then it adds to frustration, and then therefore it results in the over sexualization of women. But in a sort of a normal context, in Western society, men always fantasize. And is there anything bad about that? I mean, it's
in fact, there's everything good about it, right? There's everything good about fantasies.
Exactly.
I would even
this is my point.
I would even respell it as PHANTI.
Okay.
SIs.
Yeah.
Fantasy.
Okay, got it.
But why do we assume that it's only men who fantasize?
I was going to ask you that, because I really was going to ask you that, because it doesn't come out it's not in the open realm. I think
How is that not, and how is that a surprise or a mystery? I mean, I don't know that much about the Indian context, but I think fantasizing is just a human reaction to things that you don't really have that available to you, but you want to figure out how that works. So if it is, what would happen? Daydreaming and fantasizing is human.
Yes. And I think even
do that.
I would think even animals fantasize. Perhaps we don't know enough of them, but I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do.
Yeah, so
I've seen cats having a very clear idea of the future.
And not just sexual fantasies, but all kinds of fantasies, right? Fantasies about the future, everything, love, everything.
I've got a story of. Sorry, I have to say this. I have got a story of two cats that I saw in Goa, and they were having a great time, man. You know,
but
forever.
That's
And
not
then-
fantasy, that's real life.
And then they saw me, and they stopped. Stop looking at us.
Broke their dream.
No, but it is, but you know, fantasies. That's you know, in terms of psychology, that's pretend mode. That kids need to develop that in order to understand the world, and it stays with humans. That you need to, creativity is just a part of that. That you need to imagine things that aren't real. That is not a bad thing in and of itself. What is potentially bad is a social model that doesn't that puts taboo on something, that makes something inaccessible and unavailable and bad. If it prohibits that, and if it censors that, then you end up with a neuroses because you need to suppress things, or you need to do them after 3 drinks in private, and then and it's all very, you know, that becomes the problem.
So
And
what's the
also
difference
I must
between-
say this, and I must
Sorry.
say this, Nash, that was the 1990s from where I took the texture of that character. Today there's Tinder, and I think there's a lot of access to all kinds of sex. So it's not as suppressed as it was in 1990s small town India, from when Naren comes along. Yeah.
Yeah, but again, it's got its complexities, hasn't it? You know, we are talking about there are many Indias. The Tinder
Yes.
Tinder society belongs to one India. Not everyone has access to that.
Yes.
So what was I trying to say? So what's the difference between sexual fantasy and lechery?
That's the point I wanted to make, because yes, fantasy, everyone does, men, women. But in this specific story, it's more leering, appearing as a lecher. But if I was to fantasize, I wouldn't fantasize this kind of leching after a breast of some woman. It would be probably a Kama Sutra pose that I'll fantasize about, rather than this leering, which is what is a bit uncomfortable, as Jackie put it, because you start off the story with a fantasy which is gross, really. That's not that shouldn't be the way men or boys should fantasize.
Yeah, and I think that comes from an idea that it's an object that you want, and therefore you objectify, and it takes away the individuality and the personhood of the person he's thinking about.
Yes.
That's where the problem comes from. Not so much that there is a desire and a fantasy. It's the way that it's expressing itself, and that's potentially determined by social factors, as in, this is how you need to think about women, this is what women are, or this is what, you know, people around you suggest this is how you relate to women. Alternatively, if I've not been to a girls' school, but a friend of mine has, but like pure single ed girls' school, Catholic variation, you get similar things from the other way around. But equally, like, this makes no sense. No human being would act like that, and no boy would ever act like the way you're imagining him to. But it's that lack of exposure that Nash mentioned, plus a social idea of what a woman should be or what a man should be, that then becomes the problem. That is where I think the lechery and the depriving sort of objectification comes from.
Yes,
I
will agree to that. I do think that a lot of it comes from not getting it. So if I had to be faithful to the point of view of this particular character, I would have to follow him, because he's leching like the few men I know who do the breast talk. They do. They just are, you know, fanatical about it, and you are like, why? I mean, it's so normal. It's like, why? And then you start trying to crack their psychology. But I feel the more you get of whatever you wish, not just sex, you stop making it. it is special, but you stop isolating it as something like, a focus of desire, strong desire. And desire also to the point of it being a bit unhealthy, because the molestation, the street harassment, the lewd remarks, they also come from that place of not getting. So, yeah.
Do you think that there is a point about not just not getting it, but this obsessing is a little bit about proving to other men that they are men, that they are valuable, that they have to show each other that, I'm such a man, I can't control it, and therefore I have to talk about breasts in that way, as opposed to a just desire?
Yes. Also, there's another context which is mostly Indian, that when you have an arranged marriage of sorts, and you have never had a girlfriend, okay, if you come from that, then it's like there's so much of pressure on that first day, which is called the Suhagrat, or the first night, and so much of focus is on the first night rather than it being about the marriage. And there's so much of giggling around that first night, and that happens only because you don't know your partner well enough. Otherwise, that can't be the focus. The focus has to be the relationship, or I don't know, the marriage of families, as they say. But I think that also comes from not dating enough. But then that was, again, I'm talking about a decade or two ago. Now I think relationships in India are different. There's a lot more dating. So there's a lot more, there are more partners that you can meet. There's more understanding of yourself that you have. So this is also about a little ancient time in India, Naren's and Monika's story. Because now even women don't wear saris as much.
This is in the urban context, right? But in the smaller towns and villages,
yes,
not changed that much, has it?
Yeah.
And in fact, what I was going to ask was, has the BJP police come after you so far, or put a protest march outside your door yet? Because obviously,
not yet. Maybe they had no time to read. They had no time to read, and who knows? Many of their men would identify with Naren. They would be like, "Oh, we identify."
But that's a typical thing. The BJP doesn't read anything. They don't see anything. They just want to protest.
Unless it's on WhatsApp. So it's not on WhatsApp.
True. But the question I have for everyone is, we seem to be seeing Naren as a damaged or as a lecherous character. Is that the right way to see him? I mean, going back to the question of sexual fantasy and attraction, I mean, he is attracted to her. It's just not her boobs, it's other things that he does talk about her. Isn't that the start of a relationship? Physical attraction is obviously very important in a relationship. Somehow, in an Indian context, it's not given that much of an importance. And you think, oh no, don't worry about that. It's you concentrate on other things. But it's a bit hypocritical, I have to say. But only because Naren is not voicing his fantasies, it remains within him. And because we are reading it, it appears to be lecherous. But I suspect everyone does that because it remains private. I think the first step in a relationship is actual physical attraction. And this is exactly what's happening with Naren, and leads to other things. It leads to romantic love.
So the difference between lecturing and love is, I guess, if Naren fantasizes about every woman in the same way, then it's definitely lechery. He sees a breast and he starts getting these fantasies, then that's lecherism. Now, if it is only this woman that he fantasizes about, then it's something more than that. Okay, it's whether it is the object or the person. That's what you have to differentiate.
My question is, are we being a bit prudish when we talk about someone's fantasies? I mean, it could be lechery, but it's what it is. It's physical attraction. Go on, Francisco.
Is that because I think there is nothing wrong with physical attraction, and yes, that is important in the beginning of a relationship, but isn't there different ways to express that within yourself? And the way that he does that is he reduces her to it. He doesn't see the person at all. He just sees the physical components, and that, I think, is the problem.
That is a problem, probably because of the context, the background that he comes from.
No, that would be a problem. I would find that problematic. I think that's a problem anywhere in the world if you don't see the person at all and you only focus on the physical parts of them.
It does come through. That comes across.
I mean,
in
it's like
stories
if I was
because,
talking about this beautifully square cut jaw, and there was things that I can say about a man too, that you think like, yeah, what the hell? It's the same problem, that you want to be seen as more than just a biological function.
Yeah, no, but if you talk about a man's jaw, it's perfectly acceptable. I think that's what we're proud of. But you shouldn't be talking about the penis or something. That's the only thing.
why not? I mean, the question is, why
Yeah.
not? Why
What's the
why should women be? Why should they not be talking about
You
a
can,
man's private
though.
part?
You can, but it's not the only thing that you should be talking about. You should be
Okay.
talking about him and everything else about him, rather than just this one part of his body.
I agree. My point here is, I think sexual fantasy is perfectly okay. And I think this is what he does, Narain does. But obviously he's a flawed person. And we see his character, we see the problems in the relationship. There is it doesn't really get emotional. They seem to be dealing with everyday tasks, raising children as a sense of duty. And then because they have to do this, what seems to sustain their relationship is also sex, which is often sometimes absent in relationships. It becomes very prosaic. It just goes away after a while. It becomes problematic. So,
but Nash, do all relationships not eventually end up as a sense of duty anyway? When you do have children, when you do get over that initial honeymoon period,
I know, but I think there needs to be other things attached to that as well. If it's only a sense of duty, I don't know. I don't think it's sustainable. Or love is not sustainable. It just becomes a sort of a mundane exercise in existence, a subsistence, if you like.
But you see, this is the cynical me thinks that that's what eventually all relationships end up turning into.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I think some relationships definitely feel like they're running a kindergarten, as opposed to like they're having a project, as opposed to being together. But I don't think it's necessarily that way forever, or for all couples. I think some of them genuinely get on, amazingly enough.
I'm really envious that they seem to be having this amazing relationship.
No, I actually disagree that love sort of is transient or something like that you're talking about. Love is at a different level. I think if you love somebody, yes, of course it can fade away. But in a relationship, love is something that sustains. You might have daily problems, you have to look after kids and so on. But the underlying feeling for the other person stays on in most relationships that are together. Yes, if it dies out, you should really split up. And in an Indian context, they probably still stay together. But I wouldn't rate the lust that we've been talking about. That is transient. Okay, that obviously fades, and you really wouldn't be having sexual fantasies with your partner soon after you're married. I think that stops. That's what I think.
I think what extends relationships once they grow a little old is the discovery in your partners of what new you like to do together. Like that's what I feel sometimes when I see relationships that extend and they still have that heat and fire with them. It not necessarily is sexual, but it's like they both have discovered a new sport together, or watching movies together, and they never had that before. Or traveling, so it's a new lease for their relationship. But I also feel, coming back to this context, is that because at a particular time in India we didn't freely intermingle with premarital sex, sexual compatibility remained this myth, and you discovered it only after your marriages that, oh, we are not sexually compatible, or there's a desire mismatch. One person desires a lot more and the other person desires very little. So that incompatibility also needed to be balanced, because in that society, when you already are married, you can only have extramarital affairs or some other thing to kind of balance that out, or you are frustrated, or you have fights. So I thought, I realized sexual compatibility can only come if you have you've moved around a bit before you settle down. So besides if that was not the problem, I think otherwise dating or courtship allows you that time to discover each other. And that is a very precious time for a relationship to have that foundation. So sometimes I saw that completely missed in the
I
Indian
agree,
context.
Rochelle, and I think it's the other point that I wanted to make was the importance of sexual intimacy, physical intimacy in a relationship to sustain it, and also the absence of it. Sometimes it becomes problematic. And this is often the case in long-term relationships where it fades away, and then you need to have that spark to bring it back. Whereas in this story, in your story, it seems to be consistent. Also, they are leading a kind of a prosaic everydayness, the dutiful bringing up the children, and then he is looking after her when she gets ill. But there is still that attraction for each other. They still feel the need to be intimate with each other. Is what sustains their relationship till the very end.
Yes.
Till the time that she's actually lost a breast that he fantasized with
Yes.
20, 30 years
Yes.
ago, whatever it was. I think this is where
I was just going to say that's kind of in contrast to the other story where the husband wanted the wife to have sex with his friend because him and his wife were not sexually compatible, and then he walks in on the wife and the husband and the friend having sex, and then he sees how actually they're really sexually compatible. So I think the point that sexual compatibility is really important in a relationship really comes out in the contrast between the two stories.
I really liked that story, by the way, that obsessive character of these two people cheating on their partners, of avoiding intimacy at all cost, and imagining that the wife cheats on him as a sort of titillating factor, and then she actually does. I thought that was a very neat little twist.
Where did
You're talking about the Center for Conscience, that story.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, and where did the inspiration for that one came from? Did you observe a couple of couples who've been?
No, everything is personal. Rocha, everything is personal.
I just go to. I have my balcony situated at that place. No. I do curiously study the sexual, not the sexual lives of people, but let's say what they are just outside their houses. Let's put it that way. I don't go to their bedrooms, but I do listen in, because I find it that at least in India, we have so many double standards around sex that I find that very hilarious at times. And I find that very, very curious as to why do we lie? Why do we disguise things? Why aren't we more open about it? So I do keep a ear on the ground on the sexual habits and patterns of people, and many of them just talk. It's just that one glass now. It's not even 3 glasses anymore. It's just a one glass, and then they want to talk about their relationships in terms of sexual lives as well, or sexual habits. And
is that women, or you talk to men as well about it?
Men, women, men.
Both of them would openly discuss that.
And the best part is that women are as raring to go as the men, and that's the beauty. That's the beauty, because it's been a while since I heard that candidness and that transparency. Women's gaze and women's desires.
What I liked about that story was the not sure how to put that, but in that there's these two contrasting characters in it. There's that woman who habitually takes up affairs with men who are married, imagining a competitive situation with the other woman, and that's the thing that she really wants. And when she then finds out the other woman's actually found her own situation, this is no longer that interesting. And then she meets the guy outside, and they're both so defeated and deflated. And I really like that they came to that point together of this is what all your dreams and yeah, because you basically didn't manage to get close to another person. You never really managed emotional intimacy. You just were after a kick that had probably nothing to do with sex at all, and you didn't get that either. So I really like that story.
I'm just going to shoot off, just saying what people are having problems getting in. So I'm just going to see what's happening.
Okay.
But yeah, keep talking.
All right. Okay. No problem. Okay. So I guess we'll come back to the stories again. But how did you manage to get this published? I mean, did you have publishers queuing up to get this published, or
No, I mean,
knock on lots of
not even the strength in quotes of the first story mattered. I think short story collections are not very supported by publishers in general. I mean, whatever be the theme, so I did have to struggle a bit in getting a like a publisher for this book. But it's not, it has no connection with the first story as such. There are people who do feel a little uncomfortable when they read it, and I remember you were telling me that this is not her kind of feminism, and I said, you've just read the first page, please read it to the end. You might understand my feminism, because it's on a spectrum, but it's not so anti. But then she did read the whole story and changed her point of view about the story. There are people who just love it because they get to giggle and chuckle around it, because they understand it being in India, like. So I realized that the story also means differently in different parts of the world. Like when I took it to Iowa, people just they liked it, but they found it bizarre. Like, is this fantasy? Like, is this the whole story of fantasy? So I think different parts of the world react differently. In India, they immediately get it. They get it. They get Naren. They get Monica. They've seen these people around. And but I didn't have any trouble around it yet. The only event I remember is something not even related to the book as much as the word breasts. I had gone to Jaslok Hospital, invited as a speaker over an event called over breast cancer, an event called, I think, Breastober or something like that. And no one was actually in the panel discussion mentioning the word breasts.
And this is talking about breast cancer.
Yeah,
they were talking about breast cancer. Yeah.
This is the hypocrisy in India, isn't it? There are these double standards where it's
you still don't say breast on the podium.
So
what do you say? This round little thing or something?
Yeah, the cancer on the unmentionable. I mean, what?
I think we need to just slowly slide it into the lecturers.
It's just unsaid and understood.
Welcome,
hi,
Lakshmi.
Welcome.
Hi.
I'm sorry you had trouble getting it. I'm not sure other people also seem to have trouble getting it. I'm not sure why. We're just talking about the first story.
Let me send them the link again, actually. So
yeah. Okay. And then, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, where do I start? I love the title. I love the language. Yeah, that was very refreshing. The fact that, the main characters were maths and science, have maths and science background. And then that was woven into, that was the DNA of the story in one level. So I thought that was clever and interesting. It brought out new insights into the plot, and I remember being big jump now. I remember being shocked the last part of the story when the breast cancer emerges, and it was a bit like these Korean movies, like Parasite. All of a sudden, violence erupts. It has no proper place. It doesn't make any sense. It just happens. So it reminded me a bit of that. Out of the blue, something happens to disrupt everything. I quite like that. And then I suppose I took it more seriously than I had at the beginning. It was like a playful the language was playful and the storytelling was playful, then it became absolutely deadly serious. And it was a shame in a way, but I guess that's life, isn't it? I did enjoy it. So yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Rochelle,
you.
the only thing at some point I thought, is this getting a bit too much with all the positions that you are? You had fun with clearly writing and researching about it. So where is this going? I'm having fun reading this as is it integral to the story? Then it does become. I mean, in hindsight, I just thought maybe you could cut it down a bit. I don't know. Yeah.
But I liked your comment about you used all these words because you wanted to put them out there for all these young boys and give it to them and then move on. I think that was a very telling remark of why you did all that.
Yeah, I also wonder that, Lakshmi, thanks for your comments as well. I also wonder sometimes that living in maximum city, it seeps into you through all its senses. And you want to, when you write something, at least when I write, I'm trying to get it out of my system, actually. So this was getting that whole thing out of my system.
But is that Francisco is also a writer? Something that I sometimes struggle with when you're writing about, especially about India, is because there's so much of stimulus. There's so much that you want to write about, so much that you want to incorporate. It can be, it can distort your idea of what you want to write about, because there is a lot of noise around that integral, around that core idea. And I think a lot of Indian writers tend to do that. Maximum City, the book itself, is a good example of that. Whereas because it's a collection of short stories, I think you're able to explore the different aspects of Bombay in a way.
Yes,
so,
because if you notice Parfum, it's very subtle and it's very restrained. I don't talk till the end of what happens to Stella. So, I don't even mention pheromones. I don't mention the word pheromones. And here I go all out with breasts. So that's the contrast. I had it out of my system. And then I was ready to do the subtle form of storytelling, if at all is I required. So I think that's what also the short story genre allows you, to do different things, to have different colors and different paints, and to explore, and then you're done. You feel complete expressing that.
Yeah, so in a way, the protagonist, at least one of the protagonists in the collection of short stories is the city, is Bombay, and the cross section of people that we encounter. As you said, because it's a short story collection, it's successful. But if it were a novel, it's a very different kind of novel. If you're talking everything that has to do with Bombay, I think it was done in the past, where post-colonial literature, it was all about that, where the city did played a bigger role in the narrative, but less and less so these days, because it's been overdone.
It can become an artifice, and you don't relate to it, because at the end of the day, what you relate to in a story is the people in it, and then things around it can evoke emotions, but it's the people and their struggle that I relate to. And I thought an underlying theme of a lot of these stories was emotional intimacy and the lack of it. That perfume story was a really nice example of that too. I forget the name of the beautiful girl that he married, who had this wonderful scent that then turned out to be just a concoction of tons of different cosmetics that she splurged on. The disappointment of that, and then it was a really nice line around what's left. If that surface is gone, what's left? There was not a lot left, and then he found Stella. I quite like that and a lot of those characters in your stories struggle with that. So I was really taken by that. But another thing that, particularly I don't have an Indian context around me at all. But what struck me, and that I thought in a story collection I would write wouldn't feature the way, is the amount of domestic violence in it. That was quite, and it was quite casual. The way that in that story where the two characters have affairs, he just casually just slaps her and she doesn't even object. She doesn't even react to it. And there was a number of them, culminating with the penultimate one where it's the two children taking up against each other. Sorry, I'm terrible with titles, clearly, so I'm giving you this little
Yes, but
snippets
I
and you
know
can
that
get.
that story is Slice.
Okay.
And yeah.
Yes. So I make it a little riddle. Which story am I talking about?
Yeah.
No,
I thought that was such a prevalent theme. Is that really so prominent in Indian society, or where does that come from?
See, there is a bit of, if you talk about domestic violence, there is a bit of casual domestic violence that happens. Like, we recently had a movie called Thappad, which meant slap. Okay, Thappad, which was about a woman wanting to divorce her husband because he slapped her in public at a party. And she was a supportive wife who had given up her career and everything to be with him. And he just had a fit of rage and he slapped her. And she wanted a divorce on it. And the whole story revolved around that. A lot of people could understand it, the more modern, progressive people. But many were like, what's there in a slap? It's not a question about what's there in a slap. It is like there is so much of casual domestic violence around you that a little bit of a slap here and there is okay. A marital sex is okay. A marital rape is okay. So,
Roshan, coming to that film, I haven't seen it, but I suspect it is an issue because it's in public. If it was to happen in private, it's a completely different thing. If he had slapped her in private, it remains private and the relationship probably would have sustained. But because it's brought out in the public realm, is what causes this humiliation.
But I also, Nash, I also wonder about the thresholds of violence that are there in every society. Sometimes the thresholds are very low and sometimes they're high. I think that's a sign of the modernism in a society. So societies which tolerate too much of violence, whether it be private or public, there is a very wide difference.
Yeah, true. But I think what happens within closed doors, I think, is you don't get to know of it, and there is a lot of domestic violence is tolerated in a lot of society, even the Western societies, it's tolerated. But if that same thing is transported onto a public realm, it completely gets it's colored in a different way.
Right.
Because it becomes an act of it becomes a public act. Other people have witnessed it, so you are forced to somehow act upon that.
Yeah, I understand that. So, but in the movie, does she get the divorce?
She doesn't get the divorce because they move the story to a kind of coming together and him realizing his mistakes, and they do come around it.
Okay, so but in that context where you asked for divorce because the guy.
But many people.
Yeah. So what I was saying was, if the context for divorce is that he slapped her, whether it is in public or private, it shouldn't matter. So she's asking for a divorce because he slapped her. And if she had got the divorce, then I think it's a question of domestic violence is not acceptable in any context. Now, from a media perspective, from anything else, if you're slapped in public, it obviously becomes a bigger deal. But I would think that slapping a woman should be reason for divorce. No judge should be denying that.
Yeah. Also, I think slapping violence is the tip of the iceberg. It's more like what is the dynamics of that relationship. What is it equal, the relationship? The slapping was, the trigger, the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah. Okay.
So I was just going to add on to that, Vineet. I don't think it's just slapping a woman. I think it's slapping a man or a woman shouldn't be tolerated in a relationship.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
true. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing which is not really talked about.
What about sadomasochism? Like if you are slapping each other.
But that's consensual.
That's consensual, though.
Yeah, that is
perfectly fine.
Yeah, no, consent. Of course, that is okay, but that's different. That's not the problem here. That in the book, that wasn't consensual. That was just he slapped her because she said something he didn't like. That's very different. And there
Yeah.
were a lot of scenes where the woman gets, there was one where the woman gets beaten up and a mum gets beaten up, and then the kids fight sort of proxy wars amongst themselves. So there is a number of stories where that keeps popping up. And like, it's normal. And that made the stories very plausible on the one hand, as in like this, but on the other hand, very more shocking than if it was, oh, this is a big deal. I thought from a writer perspective that it brought across how terrible this is so prominently. He was like, yeah, and then he stopped and he was like, what?
Yes.
But this is what the book does well, is because it is a collection of short stories. It gives you a cross section of what Bombay is. It could be any city in India, but I think particularly Bombay because it's so intense. The other story, which also talks about violence, is Joe Pereira, and I think I really enjoyed that story. It's short and also quite poignant, and I like the way it ends.
Yeah, I mean that story was so short. I mean, I was reading through it, and suddenly it ended. Then I had to go back and read it again to see.
Yeah, it was more like a vignette. Yeah,
it is like
a flash fiction. Yeah.
And then you get, I guess, what you were getting at.
You know, Nash, when I had actually posted this story, Joe Pereira's, a long while ago, we did have a beta reading comment of whether the last line was necessary because it was kind of summarizing it. So did I need to have that? Or
What's
could
the
I
last
do
line?
it?
Oh, the last line.
Is,
I started with the last line because I think
yes.
absolutely, I think it is necessary. Because that's kind of that really does define what the story is about.
Yeah. And I have observed many Joe Pereiras in Bombay who live in these old, lovely bungalows connected to these high rises. So you see two cultural places right in one compound. And that brings about so much of differences because you have these high rises and you have new people and you have richer people, and then you have an ancient kind of person living in an ancient old bungalow which could be 100 years old, and it's crumbling. And I've stayed in such a bungalow actually in West Avenue, Santa Cruz, and it really crumbles like cake. You could feel its crust crumbling. And so they are relics. Human beings become relics in the way they think, and they keep thinking. So Joe Pereira, I've come across a Joe Pereira who was Rosie Nazareth, but yeah, Joe Pereira.
That's a line in the short story, isn't it? There's the walls crumbling like old cake.
Yeah, because I actually saw that 100-year-old bungalow, crust and decrust. Because again, a city is so many things, right? I mean, even when we talk about just the city, we talk about the infrastructure in the city and the houses, and then there are these old houses and new houses, and the simple division between North Bombay and South Bombay, wherein downtown South Bombay would have it would be more beautiful because of the Victorian architecture, but it would also have no basement, enough of basement parking. And you have the North Bombay, which is now the suburbs, with lavish malls and lavish swimming pools and basements. So we see space, and this is an island city. Finally, Bombay is an island city.
Yeah, going back to what
islands.
Francisco was talking about, the idea of a city taking over the narrative. I think there's a danger of that. I think it doesn't do that in your book. My question is, how much, not in your collection of stories, in real life, how much of the city, how much of a place influences us, and how much, and the other way around, how much do you allow it to influence our feelings and thoughts about ourselves? This is what, because Joe Pereira has been, he's sort of an archaic person living in this, and he's got an idea of who he is, an idea of what the city is, and his relationship to people in the city. It hasn't changed. This is why the final line is important, because finally he changes. He sees that he's not going to put up with this. So the question is, I'm assuming all of us live in big cities, is how much do we let these cities influence us?
Do you have a choice?
Yeah,
I can answer that. I completely, totally let it completely take over me.
absolutely. I think this is where you live makes a lot of difference now. I'm writing stories in Slough now because I have been here for so long.
And also I think how much you interact with the city. Like I'm living in Dubai currently, but I'm not interacting with Dubai. So there's nothing of Dubai, its people, its language, its music that's getting into me. I'm still in India. I'm still there.
And it's
So
that,
I think
Rochelle, is that a conscious decision that you've made not to interact with, not to engage with the
no, it is only
Dubai could be.
that I don't want to move around with a mask. I find that too much of a I feel very suffocated. So I'm waiting for that maskless world to come in Dubai, where I don't have to wear the mask, and then I want to listen to the music of people, just interact with the city. So also I'm kind of in this phase currently of doing a lot of writing and projects, which doesn't allow me to move too much around. So the mask and the schedule.
But this is the advantage of
But
living
it's
in a place
also,
which is sorry, I don't know, living in a place which is not that interesting. It's as writers, you can just go hole up and then write something that is interesting, possibly.
and it's writing about a place can be a way of taking you back to that place. Then you don't have to write about the place you're in at the moment. But I spent some time in LA, and I really liked it at the time that I was there. When I came back to London, I wrote a novel set in LA because I wanted to go back, and that was my way of going back.
Yes.
And of course,
I think
that
the more
book
you
is all
interact
about.
and the more you interact with a place, its people, its cuisine, that does seep into you, because it's finally the five senses with which we write, the five senses with which we live. And then if the Japanese, poets say the sixth sense is memory. So these are the senses we have, and we do live with them, we write with them. So it's
Yeah,
just an inhalation and exhalation.
As Zadie Smith says, everything she writes is about her childhood. Even if she's like writing about her contemporary life, it comes from childhood. I kind of agree with her. I think memory does play a huge part when you are expressing yourself. I'm not saying writing alone, it could be anything. But I do find that if you're writing about, say, a place like Bombay, does it help to be in the midst of it, or does it help to be detached from it? Personally, for me, I like to be detached. I think being in the midst of it is too much, too overwhelming, I get disengaged with it.
So when I wrote these stories, I still lived in Bombay, but I had detached in the way that I was staying in my suburban house with, almost which was like a cell or a studio. So I wasn't interacting with the city when I was writing about it. There was a distance, but I was in Bombay, very much in Bombay, but far away from those years where the story probably incepted itself. These stories might have come into my corners of my mind a long time ago, and it was like in a different time of Bombay, quite a window space, because I love windows, and I think all of you love windows, right? Your window from where you dream. So
the window into my mind is very, very dark, Rochelle. You don't want to know where it goes.
Wow. Okay. So I have this favorite window of mine, I have this favorite window of mine that probably I always go for the windows. I fall for the windows.
But I think that's not only it's touching on something that I find interesting too. My favorite place to write is in the middle of the mountains in Germany, where there was zero input. There is just the house that my family has had for generations. I go back, I see nothing new, and I write like a champion because there is nothing else. There's nothing I take in. And then there's times when you go somewhere new and then you experience all these things and you have some ideas, you jot them down, but I can't write that way. Then I need to take myself out of it, or I spend 2 days at home and don't write. But do you find that that's a sort of location distance, but I think you said something that made me think of sort of psychic distance, that you need a little bit of time in order for a story to marinate in you before it's ready to go, as opposed to being in a never mind where.
Yes. And I also feel besides the psychic distance, when you come to another country, I found that it's a very telescopic view of looking at your old city or old town. So there's time, and then there's the distance of another place, which gives the telescopic view. And I feel there's also more life that happens, because I've noticed this at least about the stories that in the first drafts they are what they are. There's a relationship between me and the story, and when you allow time to pass, you are a different person. You have a different perspective. When you look at those stories, the characters seem different. You discover more about them, and you're always going on a journey with them. And then at one point you say, okay, this is the final full stop. I don't want to explore more because I will never finish. So so I'm stopping here, this is the full stop, the final full stop.
And then it's the next book you can write.
Yes,
You can take it further in the next year.
Absolutely.
Can I
just moving. Sorry, Lakshmi, go on.
Oh, it was moving on really at a different point. I just wanted to say I read the first, I think, 4 or 5 stories only. And I love the story Fabric, especially because it's got that historical depth to it. And I just wondered about the research you might have done about that.
Yeah, thank you for reminding me about that story. So actually I'm working on my first novel, which is all about fashion and fabric and garment. So it so happened that this story I think was somewhere a residue of thinking, okay, I'm talking of South Asian garment industries, but what about Bombay? Because Bombay was also it had the textile mills, and that was our history. And so this novel made me research on Bombay and the Bombay textile mills, and then the mills and the malls, and then it was easy to follow the consumerism, because I too suffered from consumerism in the initial days of the malls, when malls newly came up and you just wanted to buy everything, and then you had no cupboards to place them, and you opened the cupboards and all the clothes fell on you, and then you realize it's enough. It's seriously enough. This is not how you live. But I have gone through that in the initial years of malls opening up. So once I started researching, and I watched a few films, and I actually went to these old mills which are still there, but they're all being sold. The land is so premium that it's being sold for large malls, and some of them are still haunted in, so to speak, ways, and some of them are like, still I think they're not they're lockdown mills, but they're still decrepit. And I went to these places and even had some research on mill workers, their grandchildren and all that, and so somehow went into that history and found this story out. And I also wanted to touch upon something which I had read somewhere else. As writers, we keep little things here and little things there, and then they come together. So I had read about industrial psychology, about how a worker might have problems in their work, and they don't show anything of it there, but they do have a lot of stress at home. So I wanted to explore what happens to Kailas when he moves from becoming this mill worker that he never became, or he doesn't rise in that career, and he becomes just a security guard, like any security guard, nameless, faceless. So he's almost dehumanized as a security guard. And I also thought about the watchmen in my building, because they might be just more than opening and closing gates. They're more than that. But we never think of it, because in India also, we have a class system wherein people who are lower in the class, they're not really treated as humans. You just look at them as little midgets to get your work done. So these watchmen will open and close the gates. You never bother. I used to see sometimes, the society people just fighting with them and trying to discipline them. But we never talk to them like human beings. So somewhere I would think about this watchman in my building and think, he must be something more than opening gates, right? And then everyone is so much more than just opening and closing gates 12 hours a day. So I think this textile mill worker, the industrial psychology of what happens in the workplace and how much of stress do you bring home, And what happens to the people you bring the stress home to? What about them? So I had these two women come about. But then these were all the questions I asked, and these, I think these answers came about. It's so difficult to discover stories. I don't think I write them. I discover them. And when I discover them, then I go about developing something or questioning. But I think it's just a heap of questions that I need to ask, heap of questions. And that's how the story comes about.
In this story, then, I think, okay, the whole background of mill worker becoming a watchman, that was all great, and it was background. But then you brought in these two women, right? And him marrying two women. And in fact, you've actually split it up into two parts. So did you see that as two separate stories linked together? Because to me, yes, the first one was about the watchman, but the second one is about these two women and their relationship to the watchman. So it became two different stories, right?
Yeah,
I
thought, oh yeah, please.
I was just going to say, I actually quite like the way you structured it, because on the one hand, you have this one side of the story. You never really, you think of him as one way. And then when you hear the women's story, you completely see him in a completely different light. So I quite like the way you structured it. And I actually saw it as one story, but it's just told from different perspectives.
Yes. Thank you. Actually, it was one story, but once I wrote Kailas, completely from mill to mall, I was like, wait, the story is not over, because what happens at home? And that's more important, because I always think that, what facades we have in the workplace, whether it's a blue collared or a white collared workplace, there's so much of stress we take to our near intimate relationships. And people wouldn't even guess, because we don't say that, oh, I'm stressed at work, so I'm talking badly to you. We don't say that. We just snap. We just, and then you start thinking, why did you snap? And you start diagnosing it, and you realize, oh, you're having a bad day at work. Is that why? And so I wanted to know what happened to him in his personal space. And when I started asking these questions, these women emerged. And they wanted to tell their story. And I was so happy, like, okay, come on, tell me what happened. So
I liked how it worked, the part one and part two. And I kind of felt the mood of it, the story from part one. I wasn't surprised how the two women came together and, became forever friends, perhaps. I liked that. And it was in contrast to the violence and the bitching and whatever from before. So I liked the way that played out. I just wanted, related to my first question, years ago I did some research on stereotypes of Asian women, when in this country it was kind of all in the headlines, arranged marriages terrible and women kept at home and not being allowed to have your choice. I wonder if you came across the story of the Annapurna Mela Mandal in Bombay. They were the wives of textile workers who, because of the strikes, they formed a co-op and they provided food for the men on strike to keep everything going.
I did while I was researching, I did come across them. I did come across. Yeah.
Okay. Because I think that's just a whole story in itself.
Yes, I would like to read your articles and your books if you have them on the textile history.
I've got something, yeah. So I can, if you put your email in the chat, I can
definitely
talk to you about that. Yeah. No, I think there's so much more about the garment industry in India to be said, especially with trade handicrafts kind of like dying out. In fact, a friend of mine who's Bangladeshi, she's just got a heritage lottery grant for a project about muslin. In fact, there's a special muslin called Jamdani.
Yes, Jamdani. Yes,
Yeah.
Jamdani sarees. Yes.
That's right. So
Yeah.
she's done a project on that and interviewing women why Jamdani is so important. And, you know, when they came to England, what few possessions did they bring with them? And they all had 3 or 4 possessions. The most prized was the Jamdani sari. So there's lots of stories in fabric. So I look forward to your novel.
Yes, yes. And in fact, I went to Bangladesh only, to research, and even to a place in Bangalore where the Indian textile industry is based, like some part of it, Davanagere. Yeah. And,
Again, I also love that story. I think the reason it worked for me is, I mean, of course, the context is great, the research is great, is a human story. I was invested in what happened to Kailas. And what also made it really interesting was the complexity. You get to know him as one person, and then you change perspective, and then you see him as being flawed. He's got multi layers to his personality. That's what made it interesting. But I think the ending was quite poignant. It happens to a lot of people in large cities. You are aspirational and you have those ambitions and you are driven with circumstances, and the city itself conspires to bring you down somehow, and you never see that coming. So this is what happens to Kailas. He's extremely aspirational, but in the end, he becomes this very small character.
yes.
That's the story of many people in large cities.
It is, and more so now with the pandemic and all the unemployment, the job losses. It's a whole severe new world with the pandemic. So, I mean, these stories were written before the pandemic, but had I had to write city stories now, I think it would be a very trying project.
Because of the paradox of capitalism, isn't it? And capitalism does allow some people like Kailas to progress, to get established, to go after their dreams. But then it's same capitalism which also has the ability to bring them down, because they don't have complete control over it, whereas other people do.
So your novel is about the mill workers and unemployment?
No, my novel is about garment workers and and around the fashion and garment industry.
And lots of sex in it.
There's very little sex in it, but it's how do you say now? It's well placed because I can't explore characters without their sexual lives. So it doesn't mean I went overboard like arithmetic of breasts, but there's a little bit of the sexual expressions, whatever they may be. Sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, between the romance and the sex. But I don't think my characters, I won't be able to etch characters without their sexual lives knowing something about it. I see them complete with everything. Like I even sometimes, I must tell you this, the food has interfered. Like if I have been hungry as a writer, then Mrs. Dias will go and fry rechado pomfret, and I'm like, from where did this come? But I'm going and I just love that vinegar laced masala, and so suddenly my characters will be like frying some fish.
So do you just give into that, or are you conscious of the decisions that you're taking?
No, I know I'm cheating, but at least I don't need to get up to go and get some food. Then I can continue writing, because Mrs. Dice ate the pomfret. She flipped the fish. We are done with it. My brain is like, okay, I got the rechado, and we can continue.
So as a writer, if I'm sexually starved, all my characters will also be.
No, in my case,
so I better not be sexually starved.
Satiated. No. But in my case, even if I'm sexually satiated, the character's sex lives are important.
Right.
Oh, okay. So you're going against the grain there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted, to ask a question. So I think earlier on we talked about domestic violence, but actually there's also a lot of sexual violence in the stories. So you had Honor, and then you had another one where the lady was raped, and her mother was raped before her, and then she was raped as well.
Yes.
And it just, I guess my question is, it's one thing writing about this. How were these, I guess, how did your readers and the audience react to these?
So if you're talking of the story Morning, and you're also talking about Slice, which is domestic violence.
Honor, where the
Honor.
yes.
So so I think there were very different reactions. The honor story, for those who didn't read it, is about the washerwoman who finally kills her rapist brother. And honor is because we have honor killing in India, wherein it's a different meaning. Okay, it means that if a girl falls in love with a boy, or a boy falls in love with a girl of another caste, then the family members can even kill you in honor of the family name. So it's some weird concept of honor killing. So I used honor as the title to show that here it's the woman who righteously kills her rapist brother. And is that also honor killing then? My question is not, it's very implicit, but not explicit. That story was very well received by men and women and everybody. And it's even translated into French. Yeah, and it was translated into Hindi. So somehow that was very well received. The story Slice, which is a domestic violence story, and Morning, the two women who were raped. Nobody speaks about Morning. Nobody ever speaks about Morning. I think they just read it as a story and they keep quiet. And even Slice, I don't get too many comments, because I think these stories are so disturbing that people don't comment on them. They read them, but they don't want to talk about it. So I'm so glad, Jacqueline, that you brought these stories up, because I've never, in no interaction, has these two stories, especially Morning, been ever spoken about.
Yeah, and I find that quite disturbing, I guess, because these are things that happen, and
Yes.
these are experiences that women across the board have, and we just kind of tend to sweep them under the carpet. And I mean, I for one, I'm actually quite grateful that I read them, because it's not
Morning,
always
the one about the mother of the
Glad
daughter
you
getting
spoke about
raped.
it. What is that?
Morning is a story about mother and daughter.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, in different times. Yeah. And what I wanted to actually not really explore through the story, but I had this point where society is very condescending. They would, if a woman is violated, they tell you, please report it, don't worry, we are on your side, it's not your fault, we are there with you. But they actually don't want all that. When a woman is aggressive and says, or assertive and says, see, this is what's happened to me, they're like, shh, 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 shh. So it's like very condescending, because, I see these patterns continuously, that society says feminism, zindabad, and, hail feminism. But when you are assertive as a woman, they are like, shh, quiet down, talk low, shh, why are you that?
I bet you find that, Rosha, do you find that also there's the so-called solidarity between women, and I'm talking about an Indian context, is also slightly paradoxical. The same rules apply. Women ask other women who have been abused, violated, etc., to speak up. When they do, they distance themselves from these women. There is support until the time that you speak up. When you actually speak up, they back off.
Yes. Absolutely.
I think this is where the story is great, because it's extremely explicit, and then the reaction, society's reaction to one of them deciding to speak up is despicable. It's they decide to distance themselves from her.
Yes, absolutely. So this is another very complex, manifestation of society. How can it do both things all the time? Like, I know it, perhaps this is what life is about, dichotomies, but that's a serious dichotomy.
The other story I'm reminded of is the story set in a brothel, and the racehorse. What's it called? That's a really good story. Yeah, it's a really good story, because of course, it follows the life of what's his name, the character,
Ismail, yeah. Ismail.
Yes,
And
Mel, but it's
Yes.
also multitextured because it gives us a glimpse of all the characters that inhabit his world.
yes.
And obviously the ending is great.
You know, this story, I tried to have some in joke with it because the name of the horse is Ruling Mirage.
Yeah.
So through that horse, the name of the horse, I wanted to show how all these characters are living in their mirage. They're living in their delusions of what they think is escape, what they think is freedom, and everyone had their own delusions of freedom or delusions of hope, and all of them lived in that. I wanted it to, I wanted to have, I know I may have not achieved this, but I was definitely trying to. This I forget the name of this novel. Let me come to it. I can't just remember the name of this novel. It was a novel and a film which has a very dreamy like texture, because when you're deluded, that's why I missed. I'll think of that. I'll get the name. It's just slipping my mind. But this whole delusionary mist, when you believe something and you are after that. So Ismail is after the lot, after winning at the tote, and all these other women are harboring different paths of love or freedom or escape. And Ruling Mirage is the horse that's running. So it was like everything is illusionary, everything in that story. I didn't want to have the texture which is generally very gritty, because that's what's there. Kamatipura as a brothel district, red light district, is very gritty, and you see them in films, you see them in documentaries. I wanted to think of something else that I was searching for, and I did kind of a bit of research. Going to that place is not easy. It makes you feel too much of a human and too threadbare as a human. But it's very gritty. But probably I wanted to escape too with Mist.
Oh, that's interesting. So,
Yeah.
so you were part of the Mist.
I am. I'm so deluded.
You have to be. I think you have to, as a writer, you have to be deluded. You can't be realistic. There is no way you can achieve anything by being realistic.
Oh, and another way, it's another way of telling the truth. So you become very realistic, although you're not. But I wanted to come back to that Slice story, because what I really liked about that is the effect it has isn't just on the woman. It is transgenerational, and it comes through very clearly how that is a traumatic experience on the children that they sort of reenact amongst themselves. So it destroys the whole family dynamic. It pitches everyone against everybody else. So everyone is out on their own. You have the daughters fighting each other, one on the side of the dad and the other one on the side of the mum, and sort of reenacting the same conflict on themselves and against each other. And then the parents not understanding what has been going on, because we've kept it from you, we haven't involved you, but
Absolutely,
they've passed it on. And
Yes.
so the marriages that those children will have will again be highly problematic. So you show a very clear way how that trauma translates from generation to generation. And I thought it was very well done.
I'm sort of obsessed with this idea of how children try to escape who their parents were, but it almost becomes impossible for them to do that. At some point, you are somehow unconsciously, subconsciously replicating what your parents did, maybe in a different way. You might think that you are a different person, but in the end, you are somehow mirroring what they were. And then you're doing the same, even if it was abuse, you probably are abusing others in a dissimilar way, but there are vestiges of what you experienced. And it's so difficult to escape that. I find that interesting.
I mean, there's this
And I
old
also
joke
wonder,
of that. There's this old joke that, I was so careful not to turn into my mother, so I've turned into my father.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What's the other story that I liked was, what's it called? The Man Who Walks Away, Jonathan Pereira.
Yes.
He walks away from
Noise.
Yeah. Again, really well fleshed out characters, and I can recognize all these people living in a city like Bombay. It's quite a somber tale. The acceptance of. I would like to think that the story is about many things, but I think mainly I think it's about the disappearance of hope. We live in hope always. We exist because we are in hope. Things are going to get better, or our aspirations are going to be fulfilled. Like Kailash, there's always hope, even if Kailash becomes a security guard. Somehow, in the back of his mind, there is something that keeps him going. So, in this case, at what point do you walk away from life? At what point do you walk away from your worries? I have many times thought about walking away, but it's a fantasy again. You don't do it.
Right.
You have to, you have to wake up and you have to face the world's problems. But John walks away. One day he gets up, he takes the train, he goes in the opposite direction. And I thought I didn't see that coming. I was hoping for him to come back, but he never comes back. And it also quite telling in the end where he's looking at Mount Everest. But okay, there's no return now. Man, you're taking your shirt off. You're naked. You want to climb this. That's it. You come to the very end. So as sort of a general question, I was wondering, how does one succumb to that weakness, and then you think, this is it, I'm going to walk away from it? That moment of weakness. I'm reminded of, for some reason, David Foster Wallace, extremely intelligent man. He had a moment of weakness. He came back home from university. He hung himself. This man had everything, absolutely everything going for him. I mean, of course, he had mental illness. So that point when you think that this is it is.
Nash, when you had shared this question, you also said whether it's an act of rebellion or an act of surrender. And I was thinking about this, and I thought for John, it probably is also an act of self-acceptance when it starts. Because we also leave or we move because we accept, like, let's drop the ball. Yeah, we can't do this.
Rasha, say that again. Say that last thing again.
So an act of self-acceptance, because when John leaves, he probably knows he can't take it any longer. So I'm thinking there's a third interpretation to dropping the ball. It's not surrender or rebellion. It's also a self-acceptance. For the moment that John leaves, of course, he doesn't know where he's going. He doesn't know where he's going. He takes train after train, and then he just reaches somewhere in the snow wilderness, and he's lost to time. But he's fallen apart. He's fallen apart.
But Roshni, my question is self-acceptance of what?
Sometimes you can't do something, and you need to not.
So that's surrender, isn't it? Isn't that surrender?
Surrender, yes. But does surrender have self-acceptance as well in its process? I hope it does.
When you're giving up, when you say, this is it, I can't take this anymore, and I'm going to walk away from it. It is in a warlike situation where it's like, oh, we can't win this.
Okay. Then it is
Here's a white flag. Here's a white flag, and then retreat. You're retreating. Right. You have no idea what's going to happen. So this is what John does. He retreats to an unknown space. Which what I find interesting is this unknown space is much more appealing than what is known and what is familiar back home.
And see, there are ways of looking at it, because we come from a society that has a certain definition of success. So no one will say that John succeeded. But I don't know, from John's point of view, as he's falling apart, did he succeed from getting out of that noise? Because both he and his mother are seeped with the noise of the city. So Kay is very hopeful, actually. Kay is very hopeful. So she's not run out of hope. Until the very end.
That's also kind of the representation of a mother, isn't it?
No, I'm also representation of a mother. Yeah, representation of a mother, and also. Yeah, that is true. But also, I have noticed, you've seen these people who never give up. They never give up. I don't know how they run on so much of diesel and petrol, but they just are there till the very end. I don't know what keeps them together. It's very fascinating.
That's all of
They
us,
just,
isn't
they
it?
just
I mean, we haven't given up.
no,
We haven't killed ourselves. And
no, but
it's despite.
sometimes you do see people falling apart, or propping themselves with a lot of substance abuse or vices. But there are some people who don't. They just hold themselves together, and I think that's a lot of courage, because it's an everydayness courage that you require. And Kay does that. Kay D'Souza has that courage. She holds herself just with the sound of the city. The sound of the city is her clock. So the factory sirens are a clock, and the honking is her clock. She's waiting for that sun to return. And I think she goes to her last day with that being together. And I think it's very courageous, very courageous.
I think in life you have to choose your battles. You can't fight them all, as they come. What would be the point? Because you lose your sense of self. Your integrity, I think, is your integrity has an identity, and that's what you hold dearest to you. And some things, therefore, will not matter as much as other things.
But in this case, it's a bit extreme, isn't it? He's walking away from his disabled brother. He's walking away from his mother. He's walking away from his entire life. All of us walk away from little things in our lives. We surrender, but this is a complete surrender, where he's going the opposite direction of what he ought to be, where he ought to be.
But I think another aspect is that if we're not selfish with ourselves, there's so much that we won't be able to achieve. So like, you have to make sacrifices and big decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I haven't read that story, but I'm just speaking generally.
Yeah. Also, Nash, when you say, I do think, yes, an undetected mental illness, because even that in an Indian society, we've now started speaking about. Now it's become part of the vocabulary. We never spoke about it before because we never had it.
Yeah, the Indians are all sane. They're all sane people. Yeah,
We were the sanest people in the sanest civilization.
Until I was diagnosed. Yeah, okay.
I mean, that's just crying out for my big library of psychoanalysis books. Hello. But because that's, I think there is a point too that I thought about when I read Kay. This endless optimistic. 2 years is fine. He's going to wake up, the little boy. He's going to be fine. 5 years is fine. He's just going to be a little late. And then all of a sudden it's 30 years. It's fine. Next year he's going to be fine. And I thought, at what point does optimism just verge into plain denial to make it possible for you to get
that is the pertinent point. That is the pertinent point.
But that is also important. But I also think that denial is sort of is an extremely required tool for human beings, for us to persist and survive. If you're not in denial of certain things, it's okay were to give up.
That's an interesting point, Nash. Do you want to tell us more about that?
But Francis, maybe we have talked about this. It's Huxley's idea of denying all the stimulus that we are able to relate to. We consciously, I think, switch off certain things about the world. That if you allow everything to affect us, my God, if Kay were to think that she's got absolutely no hope, I need to murder my son because it's been 5 years, it's been 10 years, it's been 30 years. I want to kill him and end my misery. But that's not how it works. I think it's the...
But is that really so binary, Nash? Is there not a way in between where you can look at reality and yet embrace it with optimism without going into, it's what's that that French film, that chocolate film?
Oh yeah.
Where she just goes through this horrible life, la la, everything is wonderful.
But do you not think, I see your point, but do you not think there is,
I'm just saying that there's a middle way of embracing reality a bit more and yet being able to cope. I don't think denial is a defense. Like there are lots of other defenses that we react to things we find difficult. That is fine, but it only goes so far. And I think she has crossed the line into this Adelie, I forget her name, that chocolate lady's place, where it's just okay. And then I think Jonathan's reaction makes sense in light of that, because what chance do you have as the other boy if the boy is clearly the one that fell off the balcony. He's Wilson. He's clearly, he needs help and it's not his fault, and of course, but there is no space for Jonathan in that life. So what does he have? He gets a uniform he's stuck into, and that's the life he's going to be prescribed. So what choice does he have? He can, it leaves him with this binary choice that his only way is out, that he can't cope, he has enough. So he goes on that train, he just sits on that train.
Francisca, he could have gotten married, had a normal life, come back to visit his mother now and again.
No, but that's that dynamic of that family that doesn't allow him to be a person at all. He doesn't play a role in that life. He has to sustain the family in order for mother to cope, to look after the brother, because that becomes the entire focus of the family, to look after little brother.
But
there's no space for him.
But as an individual, you do have the ability to make. He had the opportunity to make that decision himself. He's not beholden to the family. He could have taken that selfish act that the act walking away, in my view, is just as selfish as him going off and getting married.
No, but he I think that assumes that he's got the tools, the emotional tools, to build intimacy with another person that he can sustain a marriage with. And I think at this point, the way that family was set up, he doesn't, because he doesn't know.
And also there's I like this discussion. And also there's one more thing, is that I think the sadness of the house is seeped into him to that level that he's numb, because he puts those thermocol bits into his door to try to shut out the sounds, of his house. And he's becoming numb. Yeah,
that's a very clear trauma reaction, to go numb because you can't cope. And this is a family trauma, that the little boy has suffered this injury at age of 2 and can't develop and requires all these resources. So that's a trauma they all have to deal with, and none of them deal with it. Mom goes into unrealistic denial, and the son becomes prematurely grown up and can't build his own connections, because when he goes away, he doesn't build a connection to any other person either. He goes naked on a mountain, which is a somewhat isolated position to be in. So he can't create a connection to another person, so he cannot marry anyone, not because he can't make that choice, but because he's emotionally not capable. He has never processed that trauma.
I'm with Francisco on this, and I think, Jackie, I know what you mean. I mean, it is a selfish act. But I think in this case, not everyone has the ability, especially given the environment that he's been in. He probably does not have the immense emotional ability that requires for him to be with another person and then emotionally connect with another person, be intimate with another person, to have a normal life. He doesn't have that. It's, as Rochelle says, the sadness of this house has seeped into him so much that he's become numb, and the only way he can cope with it is by walking away, which he does. So are we to sympathize with him? I don't know. Probably not. I don't think that's the emotion that we should be attached to. The way I see it is, he simply he had no choice. And as Kay, Francisco, I agree with you when it comes to, I think she is in denial. I think especially in her case, I think there is a small difference between hope and being in denial. She probably knows that it's stupid to be in denial. She probably knows that there's no hope, but she's so afraid of not hoping. she does express at some point where, what happens to me if I die first? What happens to Wilson? There is that sort of reality that strikes her, but she pushes it aside. No, it's not going to happen. And then when he dies, Wilson does die, she knows it's coming and she accepts it. So there's both. She is in denial, but she knows that it's a game that she has to play.
It's her way of coping. It's a defense, like his is a defense. It's ultimately none of them have had the opportunity to process it properly, to move beyond that, to move beyond it. It's and I think that's where the story takes a sort of dreamlike quality of him living in the Himalayas as a half-naked dude, because it's a nice symbol for isolating yourself and, you know, completely blocking out other people.
No, I've seen friends and family. It's where people have been paralyzed and for life. How do you deal with that? This person cannot speak, cannot express anything. All this person, I assume, wants to do is to die, because what's the point in leading such a life? And you're a burden on the people. But what do this person's the loved ones do? What do the wife, children do? They feel completely trapped in this environment. They want this father, mother to die, but they can't do it. So it's that sense of entrapment that Jonathan is in, and then he walks away from it. Because he knows that if he walks away from it, despite walking away from it, nothing's going to change at home. Wilson will die at some point. This is where I think the story is really successful.
Wow, this discussion has transported me somewhere else.
That's a good sign, isn't it? That the story is good. Okay, I think we're coming sort of towards. I have no idea what happened to the others. Anyway, you're muted.
I think the password was missing from the first mail.
Yeah.
I think,
There was no
you just sent the
password. I
link?
didn't have to enter a password.
Yeah,
I got it. Rochelle,
Yeah.
you got in without the password.
Yeah.
Without the pass.
Yeah, you can, except if you're dialing in from a mobile. If you dial in from a mobile, you have to enter the password. So it is a difference. In certain circumstances, it misses out. So yeah, so it's always there are two ways to get in. Every device doesn't recognize the link.
All right.
So that's
anyway, I think we're coming towards the end.
I had a question about perfume. So I think I was expecting to see the end, this guy becoming very successful with a perfume called Stella. And then I recognized that there's a perfume called Stella, but that's Stella McCartney's. No, but more generally, I guess I always look for this as the happy ending stories and something that you fight all your diversities and become successful and so on. But none of the stories had that.
Nitin did.
Yeah, I didn't read that then.
Yeah, Euphoria. I think it was Paranoia. I think one of the characters in Paranoia did. Nitin did eventually, because he's paranoid about his colleague at work, you know, belittling him. But actually, eventually, he makes it, and that was for me. There's that one, I think, and then also Euphoria with the bodyguard, the three characters that meet together.
Yes, but I must say this: there is a kind of a capitalistic way in which we view success or making it. Okay, so only in a capitalistic way, yes, business success is what makes an individual. Then we are talking about self-actualization. But there are many other ways that you make it, like you make it emotionally. Or in Parfum, his search was not, it was to search for the quintessential perfume, maybe not to become a perfumer or a great businessman. He was searching for that perfume, which was the pheromone of love, because his marriage was loveless in that sense with Marinette. So he found, he had his success, but it's not the capitalistic way of a grand businessman. But he did get that love and that pheromone. So he got his perfume.
But he should have launched this perfume called Stella.
Okay. If there's an addendum, I am going to have all these people succeed, all of them.
As a capitalist in Vineet speaking.
They will all have a proper Hollywood ending and succeed against adversity.
I would put them all in the same mall that Kailash is in. I could
Everyone.
do it. I
So
could do that.
Jonathan comes back from climbing Mount Everest naked and still survives it.
Yes. Yes.
He sells book on survival skills in the Himalayas.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Roselle.
Thank you.
Thank you
Rochelle,
so much
thanks.
for this very.
Discussion, yeah.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for this such an engaging. I have had the time of my life. I didn't expect it to be this wonderful. Okay. In fact, I was scared because I thought I'm going to get a lot of questions which would be, like would tumble me around. But this turned out to be something else. It was such a beautiful discussion.
Oh, I'm
that,
sorry it didn't do that. I was expecting it to be completely.
because Nash told me this is going to be brutal critique, and I was like, let me get. In fact, I told my family to keep pani puri ready. I'm going to be roasted, and I'm going to have pani puri as my denial. So there's pani puri waiting for me, and there's no denial.
Okay,
Nash,
I think Rochelle, you and I need to sort of get together, do a Zoom. I will critique you. Shall we do that?
now I'm not scared anymore. But thank you so very much. Thank you so very much.
Okay.
If you happen to read the whole book and you feel like reviewing it, please do review it anywhere. Like even Amazon is fine, or any journal, newspaper. It helps with the book and the readers, new readers.
So when you finish your novel or even done your first draft, come back to us and we will.
Definitely.
have
I loved hanging out here. I am coming back. Probably every second year.
Every second year. You're going to take 2 years to write a book, is it?
That's the Rochelle capitalist and Rochelle speaking. I'm going to write a book every 2 years.
And Vineet is already
no.
saying that's not good enough.
Is it so? I'm a failure then. But I also want to read your books. I want to read your books. Jacqueline, Francisca, Lakshmi, Nash, Vinny.
Well, I have no
Francisca is
books.
writing crime fiction. You should read.
Wow.
She is. Yes.
So
All right.
see you.
Okay.
See you. And read
Thank you
it.
so
very
much.
much.
Ciao. Bye.
Thank you, Vineet and Nash.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Nash.